Hi BookTube, I'm here today to talk about terminology in literature, specifically one term, and it's called suspension of disbelief. It's something I feel is very important when you're reading a book to be aware of and to actually practice this activity, I guess. So what is suspension of disbelief? Well, basically it's a contract between the author and the reader wherein the author agrees to write a good story infused with, to quote Coleridge, human interest and a semblance of truth, as long as the reader is willing to suspend judgment about implausibility. So Coleridge, who is credited with inventing the term, argued that the suspension of disbelief would awaken the mind's attention from the lethargy of custom and direct it to the loveliness and wonders of the world before us. So basically what suspension of disbelief is that the author is going to come up with some things that aren't necessarily within the scope of realness. But it's up to the reader to suspend their disbelief about whether this is possible or not and to actually believe it. At least for the duration of the book. So any work of fiction, by it being what format it is, requires suspension of disbelief. So for example, in order to believe what you're reading, you have to ignore that you are actually reading a book in the first place. You know, some books actually work to subvert this by calling to mind that you are reading, that it reminds you that, you know, you are holding a book, you are reading a book, you are not a passive participant. You're not just hearing the story, you're actively participating in the story. And these are called metafiction, which I will talk about later, but some examples of this are The Never-Ending Story, House of Leaves, and Infinite Jest. They remind you in different ways that you're reading a book and that you're an active participant. And a lot of postmodern literature doesn't ask for suspension of disbelief, but rather, you know, they'd rather have you maintain awareness. So I think the best way to describe the suspension of disbelief is to provide some examples. So the most common example is Superman. The reader is supposed to believe that Superman can disguise himself by putting on a pair of glasses. You know, in the real world that wouldn't pass. Someone would obviously recognize him. But when you're reading a Superman comic or watching Superman, you're supposed to believe that that is possible, and you're suspending your disbelief for that moment. Another example is whole genres of science fiction and fantasy ask you to suspend your disbelief, to believe that magic is real or that certain technological advances are possible. And lastly, a very simple example is seen in the majority of literature in how people talk. You know, people don't normally talk in full sentences without saying you know, those kind of pauses. They use contractions, we use slang, sometimes we don't even complete our sentences, and not everything we say furthers the plot of our lives. Sometimes we just chat for the sake of chatting, you know? But in a book it's different. Everything on the page has a purpose, and, you know, characters talk in full sentences. And they don't say things like, you know, or okay, you know. Why suspension of disbelief is important. It's very important, I think. I get frustrated when people are like, oh, I can't believe that. It's important because we allow for the evolution and development of storytelling by suspending our disbelief. You know, it allows the author to explore different plot devices and create new tropes within the genre of, you know, things that we as readers are supposed to believe. Also, it's a mental exercise. The author is asking you to temporarily forget the real world and believe in something that you may consider impossible for at least a span of the book. You know, it takes a lot of effort to read about something out of the ordinary. You know it's not real, but believe it for the duration of the book. This helps with higher order thinking skills, and it creates pathways within your brains and allows you to accept a greater realism. It allows you to see from different perspectives and to come up with new ideas yourself. I think it's a very important skill to have, to be able to suspend your disbelief. So let me know in the comments what you think about plausibility within the narrative, or suspension of disbelief. And remember to keep on reading.